So the Bhagavad-Gita is a book which brings about a syncretic fusion, a confluence of all Ashtikya philosophies that follow the Vedas. Now, what is an Ashtikya philosophy? An Ashtikya philosophy that affirms belief in the Vedas. An Ashtikya philosophy is one that believes in the presence of God, and it also accepts the belief in the soul. So they accept the Vedas as authority, they accept God as existing, and they accept that there is a soul. The Nashtikya philosophies are those philosophies which are the opposite of Ashtikya. They do not believe in the Vedas. They do not believe that there is a God. And not only they do not believe that there is a God, but they have their own philosophy and their own version of how to do things. Now, Bhagavad-Gita rejects Nashtikya philosophies. Not only does it reject it, it argues against it. So that the Bhagavad-Gita has sections which are polemical, which argue against that philosophy that belongs to the Nashtikya group. However, when it comes to the Ashtikya philosophies, these Ashtikya philosophies are not only accepted, but they are, shall we say, elaborated upon in the Bhagavad Gita. And they are affirmed. And they're often blended together in a manner whereby the contradictions between them are resolved. As I pointed out last time, Sankhya was about renunciation, as was Dhyan Yoga. But Krishna combines Sankhya and combines it with yoga and makes yoga as karma yoga and insists that both can be practiced together. That internally you practice Sankhya, externally you do your duty in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God without expecting any fruit for your labor. So it brings about a syncretic fusion between the Ashtikya philosophies while discussing them. And it also puts them in the right perspective. Many of these philosophies, even the Ashtikya philosophies, have branches or extensions which are perhaps more recent, where they point out that they are also atheistical. A good example would be Sankhya. Some schools of Sankhya that exist till today speak as if they're atheistical. The same thing with, shall we say, karma mimamsa. But in the Bhagavad Gita, you will find consistency in maintaining that one must follow the Vedas and that one must believe in God. And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita and the philosophies contained therein are both theistical as well as following the Vedas fairly strictly. When we come to the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, particularly that section of the Bhagavad Gita where people are confused, you will see there are so many copies of Bhagavad Gita in English language and so many translations are available. You will find that many of them become totally confused when they come to the third chapter and they come to the section about the performance of Deva Yajna, when they come to the section about Karma Kanda, when they come to the section about performing Yajna for the Devtas, they don't know what to do because they're totally confused because they're not really trying to explain the message of the Bhagavad Gita. They're trying to give you some other message, some other philosophy, and they're trying to overlay it as a template upon everything they come across in the Bhagavad Gita. And therefore, they will say that, oh, these devtas, they are, like the productive potentials, they are the powerful people within this world. Oh, these devtas, you are devta. Why are you looking at other devtas? You are devtas. There are no real devtas. You are the devta. So, such kind of explanations do not do justice to what the Bhagavad Gita is about. Krishna clearly points out in the Bhagavad Gita. What does he point out? What does he say? Krishna points out in the Bhagavad Gita in the third chapter that in the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures, that is the Supreme Lord, sent forth generations of men and devtas along with sacrifice and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy by this sacrifice, because this performance will bestow on you all desirable things." So, in text 11 of the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna clearly says, Devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantu vaha parasparam bhavayantah shreya param avapsyatah. The devtas, being pleased by sacrifice, will also please you, and thus nourishing one another, there will reign general prosperity for all. So you can see here that Krishna affirms that there are devtas. Devtas are exalted beings. They are not human beings. They live in a different system altogether. They benefit from the sacrifices or the fire sacrifices that are performed according to Vedic tradition. And when these fire sacrifices are performed according to Vedic tradition, this fire sacrifice results in their wanting to also nourish and nurture you, and therefore they send rain. And rain is necessary for the growth of grain. And then grain is grown as a result of rain, which is the result of the sacrifice that you perform. And thus, you nourish the devtas, and the devtas nourish you, and both of you all live in prosperity. So it's important to understand that the fire sacrifice that is performed as Deva Yajna is a necessary part of daily living in the, shall we say, the Manusmriti. There are special sections which talk about the necessity of performing fire sacrifice. So in Manusmriti 3.68, it says, the householder, the one who lives in a home, he has 5 slaughterhouses where insects and small creatures are slaughtered inadvertently. One is the hearth, your fire, your kitchen fire. The grinding stone, where you grind your food and your masalas and so on. The broom, which is used to clean the house. The pestle and mortar, which are used to grind smaller amounts of spices and masalas, and the water vessel. In all of these, to some degree or the other, small insects, small organisms meet their depth. Therefore, this hearth or kitchen fire, the grinding stone, the broom, the water vessel, the pestle and mortar are known as the five slaughterhouses, and they are supposed to bind the individual grihastha down with fetters of sin. To become free from those from those five causes of sin, the householder is recommended in the Bhagavad-Geeta to perform expiation. To get rid of these sins, he is supposed to perform 5 yajnas, and these yajnas are known as Panchamaha yajnas. These Panchamaha yajnas are Brahma yajna, which is also known as Rishi yajna. It is teaching and studying the scriptures, which have been painfully scribed by the great rishis. We offer tarpana, or the offerings of food and water, to the ancestors. We offer Deva Yajna. That was Pitra Yajna. Then Deva Yajna is the fire sacrifice which you offer to the Devas, which is covered here in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Then there is the scattering of food for birds, insects, and other small animals so that they will not go hungry. This is called Bhuta Yajna. And lastly, there is what is known as the Atiti Yajna, that whenever learned people gather or enter your house as an unexpected guest, so they are to be treated like gods, and they are to be worshipped, and they are to be fed to their fullest satisfaction. So these 5 sacrifices are known as Ahuta, Huta, Prahuta, Brahmyahuta, and Prasita. So the Huta is what is described here in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the performance of fire sacrifice. So Krishna points out here, elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna points out in the same chapter, Annad bhavati bhutani, Anna parjanyo sambhava. Annad bhavati parjanyo yagna karma samudbhava. So Krishna is pointing out that first you need to do your duty. Having performed your duty, you need to perform your Vedic karmas. And having performed your Vedic karmas, you will get rainfall. And this rainfall will bring about the growth of grain and food for yourself. Of course, we can extend it much more than this. And it is not just grain, but there are several benefits to performing Deva Yajna. The sacrifices that you perform in the form of Deva Yajna lead to reciprocation by the Devatas. And this reciprocation results in, number 1, you will receive whatever you need for your requirements to live happily on this earth. All the material requirements that you have on this earth will be granted to you by the Devatas. Number 2, if you are performing this yajna, you are assured that when you leave your body, you will go to Swarga. Not that it's a permanent place. Heaven is not a permanent place. Heaven or Swarg is not a permanent place. Krishna points out that te tam bhuktva swarga lokam vishalam shine punya martya lokam vishanti. That having exhausted those credits, you come back onto this earth. But definitely, by performing this fire sacrifice, you reserve a place for yourself in heaven. When you are reborn, having performed this fire sacrifice and having enjoyed in Swarg, which is the result of what we call as Ishtapurta. Ishtapurta is the uh, good karmas which you have accumulated are called Ishtapurta. And that's Ishtapurta not only enables you to live in Swarg, but it also enables you to have a superior birth in a more aristocratic family with superior beauty and physical uh, attributes. You will be born into a family where you will get more knowledge, more wealth, more beauty. All this will come to you as a result of performing yajna. But Krishna, of course, doesn't want you to perform yajna for this reason. As I pointed out earlier in the second chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna has clearly said, Bhoga Ishwarya Prasaktanam Taya Parta Chetasam Vyavasatmika Buddhi Samadhavana Vidyate. That those who are intent on enjoying more enjoyment, more wealth, more beauty, more this, they can never have the determination by which they fix their minds on the Supreme Lord and become free from the cycle of birth and death. He also says that Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna Nirdvandva Nitya Sattvasto Niryogakshem Atmavan. That in fact, these Vedas and this benefit of these Vedas are only to do with the three gunas, they're to do with the world. Nevertheless, Krishna wants you to do these yajnas. He points out, he affirms them, and he points out very clearly that in the Bhagavad-Gita he says that karmanyevadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan ma karma phala hetur bhurmate sangosto akarmani. He says you must do your Vedic karmas and your duties, because by the performance of all this, you have a right to do that, but you have no right to the fruit. Don't keep your mind on what you're going to get. You do it in a spirit of sacrifice. And if you do it in a spirit of sacrifice, it will give you the final benefit, which is to go back to Godhead and to become free from the cycle of birth and death. So when you come to understand or to accept the Vedas and the Vedic karmas come under what is known as Purva Mimamsa. Purva Mimamsa is that school of Hindu philosophy which deals specifically with the performance of Vedic Karma Kanda or the performance of fire sacrifice. It is not only one of the 6 affirming Ashtikya schools of Hindu philosophy, but it is an important school. And why is it an important school? Because it is not only enjoined by the Vedas, but it became the primary means by which the priests who lived at that time generated their livelihood. And therefore, the Bhagavad-Gita affirms this. So there are many types of fire sacrifice. One is Deva Yajna, which we saw here in the Panchamahayagyas. But you also have other yajnas which are performed as sanskaras. And these are supposed to be performed at certain milestones in your life. Right from conception to birth, to naming ceremony, to the time when you begin to study, to marriage, and so on and so forth. There are continuous performance of yajnas that are done. They are all performed at certain milestones in your spiritual life so that you will remember God and forget yourself, and you will acknowledge the Vedas, and you will surrender yourself to that Supreme Lord and thereby move further along the spiritual path. So the Bhagavad Gita actually, seriously, goes ahead and insists that you must engage in performing yajna. Not only does it go ahead and say that you must perform yajna, but also he points out that these yajnas are coming directly from the Vedas. You can see chapter 3, text 15. And he goes so far as to say that those who do not follow this prescribed Vedic system of sacrifice leads a life of sin, because a person delighting only in the senses lives in vain. See, whenever you live life, life is not lived for one's personal enjoyment. It is done to please God. And if you forget about God and you simply indulge in sense indulgence and sense gratification, it becomes a life of sin. So therefore, in chapter 3, verse 16, Krishna points out, Evam pravartitam chakram nanu vartayatiha yah agayur indriya aramo mogham partha sajivati. A person who does not follow this prescribed system of Vedas, of sacrifice, of yajna, leads a life of sin, because a person who delights in the senses lives in vain. Now, what happens is that when you perform these yajnas, the performance of these yajnas purifies you. When you perform any action which is to please God, to remember God, and to forget oneself, then the performance of these yajnas, performance of your duties towards your family, towards your society, towards your nation, if you perform them in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to please God, these acts of sacrifice, along with the acts of sacrifice, which is the fire sacrifice and any other sacrifice you may perform, you become purified. And as you become purified, you become fit for God realization. It has been pointed out variously that the Vedic karma kand is the fruit, and that fruit, is the flower. Vedic karma kand is the flower. And by cultivating that flower through the performance of all your duties, including your Vedic duties, this flower becomes the fruit, and that fruit is known as Vedanta. So by practicing the Vedas, sitting in front of the sacrificial fire, offering oblations into that sacrificial fire with the idea, idam Krishnaya, idam namama. It is for you, Lord, it is not meant for me. And it is meant for the various devatas you're offering to. So, idam Indraya, idam namama. And when you offer oblations into the fire like this, na mama means not me. So what happens is that in sacrifice, you diminish the sense of self. And as you diminish the sense of self, you weaken the sense of self, you attenuate the sense of self, you become purified. So your physical duties in the world and your Vedic duties of sacrifice ultimately lead to purification. But Krishna now points out that even if you have become so purified that you do not need to perform these sacrifices, in chapters 3, text 17, Yastva atma ratireva syad atma triptascha manava atmanya evacha santushtas tasya karyam na vidyate. One who is, however, taking pleasure in this divine, who is illumined from the divine within him, who rejoices in it and is fully satisfied in this divine, He is fully satiated, and for him there is no duty. So he says, such a person does not need to perform yajnas. Such a person does not need to perform yajnas. Such a person does not even need to perform his everyday duties. We will see later in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna points out that sannyaasastu mahavao dukham aptum ayogatah. That if you have taken to renunciation of the world, giving up your duties, your fire sacrifice, and you become a mendicant, you become a monk, you become a sannyasi, then such a person will get only sorrow if he is not become completely purified and attained union with God. And here he repeats that. नैव तस्य कृतेन अर्थो न कृतेन कश्चन न चस्य सर्वभूतेषु कश्चिदर्थ व्यापाश्रयः. That a person who has now thus become purified, he doesn't need to depend on any other living being, and he does not need to perform this fire sacrifice. But Krishna says, even then, Krishna says, you must, even if you are fully and pure, be completely purified, even if you are situated on the pure spiritual platform, even if you have no need to perform your duties for purification, you must continue to work in the world. In text chapter 3, text 19, he points out, Tasmad asakta satatam karyam karma samacharah asakta hi acharam karma param apnoti purusha. So without being attached to the fruits of activity, one must act within the world as a matter of duty, because by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. So Krishna wants you to purify yourself through the performance of these Vedic karmas. But having performed these Vedic karmas, he says, you must continue to work in the society, because ultimately working is the ultimate means of purification. In the 5th chapter, Krishna has already declared that kayena manasa, when you work with your body, with your mind, with your senses, yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhe. Even yogis, they continue to do their duties within the world, and they do it because it continues to purify them. And indeed, elsewhere he has also pointed out that yagya dana tapa karma pavanani manishinam, because even great souls continue to be purified when they worship through the performance of yagya, dana, and tapa. And he says that karmaneva hi samsiddhim astita janakadaya loka sangram evapi sampashyam kartum arhasi. So just like Janaka became pure and attained the perfectional stage by performing his God-given duties as a king, so also you should also do similarly. Even if you are God-realized, even if you don't need to do your duty, you must continue to do this for the sake of the welfare of people in general, to serve the people in general, to add value to the world of people in general. You must do it. And you do it because you want to set an example to others in society. Yad yad acharati shreshtas tatta devataro jana sayat pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. So this is the important part which Bhagavad-Gita points out, that you use Vedic karmas and your duty in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to purify yourself. And even after you purify yourself, you continue to do your work within the world. And you continue to do your work within the world to benefit society, to set an example to other people who will follow you. Otherwise, the whole world will abandon work. And as they abandon work, the whole world will be perishing as a result of this adharma. So Krishna points out that even for him there is no need to work, but he works nonetheless. And he works nonetheless because he wants to set an example to everybody. So I think this is where I will pause. If you have any queries or questions or comments, please feel free to go ahead and ask me any questions.
Thank you, Shantanu for such an enlightening session today. So the first question that I have is that Krishna suggests rising beyond the Vedas in some of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. So is this a rejection of the Vedas or an encouragement to seek their deeper purpose in life?
No, I can't hear you clearly.
Um, can you hear me now?
Yes, but speak
Okay.
slowly.
So the first question is that Krishna suggests rising beyond the Vedas in some of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
So is this a rejection of the Vedas or is it an
No, it's a
encouragement?
rejection of using the Vedas to achieve material fruit alone. That verse which says Traigunya Vishaya Veda follows the verse which says that Bhogaishwarya Prasakta Nam Taya Parita Chetasam Vyavasayatmika Buddhi Samadhavana Vidyate. That if you are intent on enjoyment, if you're intent on acquiring greater wealth, more beauty, more knowledge, more everything that is beneficial within the world, he says that will not benefit you. For true benefit, you have to perform your duties in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, remembering God and forgetting yourself. Thereby, you fulfill your obligations in this world by doing all your duties. And at the same time, because your mind is intent on God and not on self, you come closer to divinity.
Yeah. And how can Krishna's teachings about Devas and the Vedas guide spiritual seekers today? Especially when, about when it comes to balancing material and spiritual goals in one's lives.
See, the first thing is that you have to understand that because the Krishna was talking in creating the Bhagavad-Gita or the message of the Bhagavad-Gita, he talked about all the 6 philosophies of the Vedas, the 6 perspectives or darshanas of the Vedas. One of them, of course, is Karma Mimamsa, and it was integral to the livelihood of the priests or the Brahmanas. You could not reject that. But the point is that it is necessary to perform yajna. It is necessary to perform yajna. And this is the 3rd chapter. When we come to the 4th chapter, then Krishna explains that there are many types of yajna. And that Deva Yajna is only one of them. Fire sacrifice is only one of the yajnas. That there are many, many types of yajnas. And I think in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, or perhaps a little later, Krishna points out that of all forms of yajna, I am the chanting of the holy names. So if you can't perform fire sacrifice, if you can, that's wonderful. You have organizations like Arya Samaj, which teach you and encourage you to perform fire sacrifice in a Dainik Yajna at home. So that's wonderful if you can do that. But if not, you should remember that Krishna says that of all forms of sacrifice, I am the chanting of the holy name. That Harer Nam eva kevalam, kalau nasteva eva gatiranyatha. That if you can chant the holy name, chant the holy name, chant the holy name, for there is no other way, no other way, no other way in Kali Yuga. So chanting the holy name, if you can do, and my suggestion to the people who follow what I am saying is that if you can chant, let us say, 16 malas of 108 beads in the morning and 16 malas of 108 beads in the evening, you will find that you will attain, and of course, you spend 8 hours of the day working in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to Krishna. You will find that your life will become tremendously different. and you will get great peace of mind and great advancement spiritually. Of course, those who want to perform yajna, it's one of the affirmed sacrifices that you may perform. But for Kali Yuga, perhaps the sacrifice that is best is the chanting of God's names.
Um, Another follow-up question to this is any particular reason why one should chant 16 malas of 108 beats?
This is my personal experience,
Hmm.
and I am only sharing my personal experience. Originally, if you go to some of the organizations, they will tell you to chant only 16 malas. But I believe that anything less than 32 malas will not be greatly beneficial to you. There are many people with many problems who seem to be chanting 16 malas. Minimum 32 malas, and if you are on vacation, on holidays, holy days as they call it, you should
Hmm.
chant perhaps 64 when you're doing nothing else.
Hmm.
If you're serious about spiritual life, if you're a cocktail party spiritualist, then you don't need to do that.
Thank you so much for today's session, Shantnuji. It was lovely. It was very enlightening. And for our viewers, those who liked this session, please don't forget to like the video and also join us next Thursday at 8 a.m. for yet another session on the Bhagavad Gita. Jai Shri
Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna.